third-party candidates will become enemy number one for the Democratic establishment, I would say, for cable news. Also, because after terrible polling, and this is prolonged polling, and we're going to be talking about a Bloomberg poll that just recently come out where he's down in 7 battleground states. There's a previous poll, I think it was CNN, 6 battlegrounds, now 7 battleground states. And they cover it briefly here. Biden forgave billions in student debt. Polls show it's not enough for Gen Z. He's still losing by a mile, not by a mile, but he's still bleeding support is a better way of describing it. The disconnect illustrates one of the core challenges of Biden's campaign for a second term. He struggles to get credit from voters for policies intended to motivate him. So policies that's intended to motivate, he struggled to get credit. They don't describe it as the policies aren't good enough to motivate. They describe it as this is the policy, this is the thing that he's trying to gain your, and whatever, you must take it and like it. Doesn't matter how small of a crumb it is, you must take it and like it. I guess is the position of corporate media. And I continue, that's left him trailing former President Donald Trump in a head-to-head matchup in each of the 7 states in the poll. The first time the poll has shown Biden behind across the board.
A hypothetical 2024 election matchup that shows Donald Trump beating President Joe Biden in 7 swing states, including 6 won by the sitting president in 2020, according to the new numbers from Morning Consult and Blue.
Look at that. So, all states, he's up 5 points. Let me see what the margin of error. I think that says 4 points. I can't tell what the margin of error is. But this Morning Consult, 4 points for a Morning Consult poll. That's kind of big. How high? So for all swing states is a 5-point lead. Arizona 4, Georgia 6, Michigan 4, Nevada 3, North Carolina. This is a big one because they thought they were going to win North Carolina or had a chance. They were up 9 points there. But so let's continue with the segment.
Bloomberg, Trump holds a 4-point lead over Biden in Arizona, a 6-point lead in Georgia, 4 points in Michigan, 3 points in Nevada, 2 points in Pennsylvania, 4 points in Wisconsin. Those in addition to a 9-point lead for Trump in North Carolina, a state he won by less than a point in 2020. The new survey also shows Trump with a 7-point victory across all those battleground states when third-party candidates are included on the ballot. Joining us now, White House reporter for...
So when third-party candidates are included on the ballot, all of those polls that were in the margin of error suddenly spring outside of the margin of error. Now, when you have polling falling the way that it is, or let's just talk about trajectory. This is what they like. So the polling is trajectory going down. The trajectory of your poll is this way. You have multiple polls, different outlets, all saying the same or all indicating the same trajectory. You have multiple polls, and you have gold standard, what they consider gold standard polls coming out. Bloomberg, CNN, Morning Consult, coming out with these polls, which is sending shockwaves. And because of that, what are they going to say? Okay, the polling is not coming up because he can't change policy on Israel. The polling is not coming up. He's not going to change policy on immigration. The polling is not going to come up. He's not changing policy on the police state. So what do we got to do? We have to start doing things like ending democracy, like closing primaries, like getting people off of ballots, or like going after third-party candidates. Now, I gotta say, imagine if Dr. Cornel West was still here with the Green Party in this dynamic that we see that's happening to this free fall with Joe Biden, he would be the candidate that's speaking. Let me think. Besides Claudia De La Cruz, no, Claudia De La Cruz and Jill Stein will be on point with Palestine. I was going to say, so he'd be, but if he would be in place of Jill Stein, she wouldn't. She's only running because he's not running, because she understood there has to be somebody running at this time for this particular election, with these options in the polls being what they were for Joe Biden. But let's continue.
For Bloomberg, Kayla Gardner with more on these poll numbers. Kayla, what stood out to you?
I think what stood out to me the most was definitely when those declared third-party candidates and independent candidates were added in, Trump's lead extends to 7 points. So we specifically asked voters about Jill Stein, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Cornel West. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. by far had the most support at 9%. And I think this really underscores some of Democrats' worst fears. They had fear that some of these candidates were going to pull away voters from Joe Biden, of course, and this poll at least suggests that they will. So
because a poll like this suggests that they will, you can best believe the piranhas have entered the water and will be going after these third-party candidates. Now, is in our opinion, and Nick and I will just speak for Nick and I, that somebody has already reached Dr. Cornel West. This is the whole reason he left the Green Party. Could you imagine if Dr. Cornel West was actually on these ballots? Now, I must say, RFK Jr. could be polling. That's fine and dandy. But if you don't have the money behind you to get the signatures to get on ballots, all the polling means nothing. Because 9% of zero is what? Zero. We all know math. 0 times anything is 0, right? So let's continue with this segment.
We have seen Democratic efforts to push back against some of these candidates. We've seen some PACs like Move On, the Iron PAC, basically arguing that these candidates do not have a path to the presidency. Move On also debated no labels, which could also put out a candidate in early 2024. And that just adds to the worries that if more candidates, third-party candidates specifically, add to this race, that it could eventually hurt Joe Biden.
Kayla, when you look at the numbers,
I never, just recently, I've never seen so many segments lately where there's just awkward silence because they literally don't know what to say with some of these numbers and things that are being said, and they almost know not to say much about it. They just kind of let the reporters say was read, and then they just kind of pivot. No commentary about it because they don't want. Anyway, I'll leave it there. I don't want to go into that part. But let's
that Biden is losing. Where he's losing from, it's often it's young voters, it's people of color, especially younger Black men, younger Hispanic men. Are you seeing that in this poll as well?
Yeah, that's right. Young voters, Black voters in particular, were also people that were most likely to say that they could consider a new or alt.
I must say that does my heart very well. That to hear that Black voters are some of the group that's at the forefront of saying fuck this guy Joe Biden, or at least I'm open up to a third party candidate. But they are saying both actually, because as in the polls, the polling for Black voters and Black men has dropped for Joe Biden, and I'm happy to hear that. I hope it continues to drop.
Alternate political party, but I think the thing that stood out the most in this poll was the economy continues to weigh on the president. There was some good signs for Joe Biden, though. People were less likely than in an October poll to say that they, I'm sorry, excuse me, but that they thought that prices were increasing. They were less likely, and they were also more likely to say that their local economy was better than the national economy. So there is some signs that the White House has been hoping that moderating inflation could start to resonate with voters. And this poll starts to show that some of those things are resonating there.
So, okay, let's check through a couple of these states with the idea that, we're still a year out. There's a lot of caveats. Things can change. And these margins are all close, most within even, in fact, the margin of error, particularly if it is just a one-on-one race. There's a lot of concern about Michigan among Democrats in the wake of the Israel-Hamas war, where they're seeing Arab-American voters, Muslim voters break away from the president. Not necessarily say they vote for Trump, but they might stay home. That's a concern, and Trump up for there. Also, the other one that grabbed me is that when you talk to Biden people, and I did some this week, they think that in addition to having to play defense in these swing states, the one where they think they can go on the offense, they might be able to pluck from Trump's column, is North Carolina. But that here, down 9, that seems like a pretty substantial number.
Agreed. North Carolina, at least according to this poll, is not something that's in the margin of error. Also, Georgia, which the president won by a very close margin as well. And I think the concern was in 2020, Biden had such small margins. He cannot afford to lose some of these key blocks, like you mentioned, Arab Americans, young voters, black voters. So I think they're really going to have to go on the offense. And something that I think is important to watch, especially in the economy, is they have been talking about price gouging. They're really putting pressure on corporate America, on companies to start bringing down some of those prices, especially in the healthcare industry and the oil industry.
Again, the headline reads, Biden forgave billions in student debt. Poll shows it's not enough for Gen Z. President Joe Biden, unprecedented action to erase student loan debt has fallen flat with young voters in swing states that he needs to win re-election, according to the latest Bloomberg Morning Consult poll. Let me make this a little bit larger for the seeing impaired, and I am that seeing impaired. The disconnect illustrates one of the core challenges of Biden's campaign for his second term. He struggles to get credit from voters for policies intended to motivate them. That's left him trailing former President Donald Trump in a head-to-head matchup in each of the 7 states in the poll. The first time the poll has shown Biden behind across the board. Biden is not reaching Gen Z swing state voters with his plan to cancel student loan debt. A plurality of swing state Gen Z voters, those born in 1997 or later, say Biden is not doing enough to address the burden of student loan payment. Even after he has erased $127 billion in such debt in initiatives that are widely thought to be aimed at locking in the key demographic, a majority of this group approves of the reliefs his administration has already provided to borrowers, but they were also less likely to have heard about the debt cancellation that older voters. So this part here is essentially trying to make the case that the reason the polling is low on this particular area is because they just hadn't heard of it. Essentially, that's what they're saying here. But let's read this first data point from the poll. Based on what you know, is Joe Biden doing too much, too little, or is he doing the right amount for addressing student loans? And too little, 43%. That's the largest group. 43% says, I'm sorry, too little. I said too much, too little. Based on what you know, do you support or oppose the administration's decision to cancel $127 billion in student loan? 59% said they do. So he's just not doing enough. How much have you seen, read, or heard about Biden's administration to cancel the $127 billion? 42%. So this is where they're saying why he's still his polling is still so low in this area. Trump now leads Biden across all 7 states. 11 months before the election, Trump is leading Biden by 5 percentage points among registered voting in head-to-head matchups across 7 swing states. Trump's lead is inside the margin of error in Arizona, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, but is larger in Georgia and North Carolina. The poll had a margin of error of 1% for all 7 states combined, and 3% and 5%, and between 3% and 5% for the individual states. Let's continue, and I'm going to go down here. If the November 2024 election for president were being held today, and Joe Biden and the Republican Donald Trump were on the ballot, for whom would you vote for? And I went over these numbers, I believe 47% Trump, 42% Biden. And then you can see the details there in each state. I won't read each one. Trying to, for the sake of time, trying to skip through some of this a little bit here. But Biden still leads Trump with Gen Z voters overall. But look at it, what it is, 44 to 38. That's only a 6% difference. That is insane when considering in 2020, I believe he won the youth vote by double digits. Now let's continue. The poll shows Biden faces hurdles with his wider coalition. Swing state Democrats are increasingly dissatisfied with their president, with 23% of those who voted for Biden in 2020 saying that they have unfavorable views of him today, compared to 17%. So that's an uptick of 6%. I'm sorry, that is a 6% difference compared to Trump, because in the same sort of question, Trump only received 17%. How likely are you, if at all, to consider voting for a presidential candidate from a new political party that is an alternative to the Republicans? This is where we're talking about the third party. This is why the third party voters or third party candidates is now the number one target. All swing state voters, 13%. Very likely, 13%. Oh man, I wish they gave the total, because I don't know what this block is here. They're only giving the very likely. Gen Z, 19%. 19% of Gen Z voters are considering voting for a third party candidate, essentially, is what this poll states. Now, let's see here. This is the other part I wanted to cover. Younger generations and Black voters were more likely than the average swing voter to consider for a new political party. So what RBN has been doing, Nick, Rome, Savvy, JB, I hope we're contributing to this number, and we need to get this number more closer to 50%. But as you can see, Gen Z, and when you're talking about young voters, Gen Z is ranking high, as they're going to go 19% with third party or open to it at least. And then it's very similar number for the Black vote, and that is 18%. And these are two demographics that the Biden coalition simply cannot lose. They simply cannot lose that. But let me read on. Trump leads over Biden widens to 7 points in battleground states when declared third party and independent candidates are thrown into the mix. And like I said, third party candidates are now enemy number one, because the policy positions on Israel, Palestine, for example, the policy positions on forgiving student loan debt, for example, the policy positions on an array of other things, including immigration, are not going to change. So since those aren't going to change, what you have to do in a democracy, in this democracy, I guess, what the red blue team have to understand what they have to do, they have to now start vote suppressing is what they need to start doing in order to win. And when you can't bring the voters out, then you have to suppress the voters on the other side, or suppress voter in some sort of category so that you can win. And that's what we're going to begin to see, is my prediction. We see it all the time. I just believe that it's going to be a huge uptick, because these numbers have been pretty stagnant on Joe Biden, and it's foreshadowing what's going to happen. So if he's not going to drop out, if these numbers aren't pressuring him to drop out and he's going to stay in, then the powers that be that are around him are going to start doing their things to go after these third party candidates. And I'll read a little bit more. Former Democratic candidate RFK has 9% support from swing state voters from his independent bid, and no other candidate receives more than 2%. That's interesting. that's interesting that Jill Stein. So far, well, Jill Stein just recently announced, so she's not polling that high yet. But it's interesting that Cornel West is not, because again, I don't feel like he's running a real campaign for a person who's really trying to win the nomination. Or I don't even feel like he's running a campaign for a person who's trying to pretend like they're trying to win the nomination. I don't feel like he's doing either or. He's not pretending whatsoever, in my opinion. But anyway,